Imagine that you're on a soccer team with a demanding coach, but the day after a huge win, your coach says, as a reward, I'm letting you run practice. You can even play a game. The team just has to agree on the activity democratically. But wait, there are some conditions. Only players who live in the same neighborhood as the coach are allowed to choose. From that group, the voting pool is narrowed down to those wearing the most expensive cleats. Well, in the end, 3 team members get to decide how to run practice, and you're not one of them. How would you feel? Likely a bit annoyed, especially after you find out that the players in charge really like sprints. Why does this bother you? Your coach selected the voting pool based on factors largely out of anyone's control. The adults in your life are the ones who chose your neighborhood, and their wallet is likely responsible for your cleats. And last I checked, wearing flashy shoes doesn't necessarily make you the best team leader. So while your coach preached democracy, it fell a little flat. Just as your soccer practice lay in the hands of privileged kids who happen to live in the right place, post-Enlightenment democracy was more of an oligarchy, or rule by the few, of rich white dudes who lived in the mother country, not one of its colonies. But the world was changing. Industry magnates were getting rich off the backs of workers, many of whom couldn't vote. Colonists supported another country, and also couldn't vote. And for women, it went beyond the raised eyebrows that resulted from such scandalous behavior as riding a bicycle, because no matter a woman's wealth, she had absolutely zero voice in politics. In this unit, we'll be examining how democratic reforms were made in some familiar locations and how colonies struggled for self-rule. We'll also be investigating how political reform took a turn towards civil war in the United States, but today, it's back to 2 familiar places. Our guiding questions are: what were the results of voting reform in Britain? How did the Dreyfus Affair result in the strengthening of France's Third Republic? Our big picture question is: what reforms would the modern-day government of your country benefit from the most? Think back to the glorious revolution of 1688, when William III and Mary II became co-rulers of Britain in a constitutional monarchy. At the time, it was quite revolutionary. Parliament telling the monarch what they could and couldn't do. But there was still work to be done. Parliament was made up of 2 groups. Members of the House of Lords were largely descended from nobility or clergy members, many of whom inherited their seats. The House of Commons was elected by the British people, and by the British people we mean about 5% of them, men who owned a significant amount of land. Britain had become the world's industrial leader, and yet most of the upper middle class factory owners, bankers, and merchants at the forefront of this movement were excluded from voting. They were the first to demand suffrage, a term meaning the right to vote, leading to the Reform Act of 1832, which lowered the property ownership requirements for voting. This gave industrial cities such as Manchester and Leeds more representation. Even still, most people still had no say, including the workers, yes, the very gears turning the industrial machine. In response, the working-class Chartist movement emerged, demanding universal suffrage for all men along with a secret ballot and salaries for parliament members. Let's formulate a hypothesis. Why do you think the Chartists wanted a secret ballot and a paid parliament? If a ballot isn't kept secret, voters can be bullied or bribed into voting for a particular candidate. On the other hand, secret ballots result in a more honest voting system. The public, and candidates themselves, don't know who you're voting for. In modern democracies, secret ballots are the standard. The Chartists supported a paid parliament because it would enable more people to participate in government. At the time, parliament positions were voluntary, so only the wealthy could afford to go into politics. As you can guess, the rich would continue to pass legislation that ignored the lower social classes. While at first unsuccessful, the suffrage groundswell had started. Under Queen Victoria, the House of Commons gained democratic power, and voting rights were progressively applied to common British men. Eventually, secret ballots and paid parliament became the law in Britain as well. But, in case you're keeping track, no, a British woman still could not vote. It's not like the subject hadn't been brought up. In fact, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who you learned about in connection with socialism, advocated for women's suffrage as far back as 1818. But Parliament yawned and advised women to stick to croquet. But the women of Britain wouldn't be silenced for long. Reform societies popped up, starting with the 1872 formation of the National Society for Women's Suffrage. These movements provoked backlash, with some feeling that women were incapable of participating in politics. Even some women found the idea to be too radical. Thus, change came slowly. In the early 20th century, British activist Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the Women's Social and Political Union, led impassioned protests that finally caught the attention of British policymakers, who granted women across the United Kingdom the same voting rights as men in July 1928, 2 weeks after Pankhurst's death. So let's ask our first guiding viewing question. What were the results of voting reform in Britain? Meanwhile, in France, men could vote, but with an emperor at the helm, it meant essentially nothing. France's post-revolution experiments in democracy weren't exactly what you'd call stable. After the First Republic came Napoleon's empire, a constitutional monarchy, a very brief Second Republic, and another empire run by Napoleon III. Now, let's loop in the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. Remember how he rallied support for German unification by coaxing France into declaring war on them? Well, that was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, and it went over in France like tube-squeezed cheese on a baguette. That means really badly. France was routed and Napoleon was overthrown. Enter the Third Republic, a parliamentary democracy. It didn't get off to an easy start, with frequent government turnover and competing political parties. Some wanted to restore the monarchy, or even military rule. Radical uprisings and subsequent executions at the hands of the Jacobins, yep, they were still around, smacked of the Reign of Terror. To make matters worse for France, the German threat still loomed, and it became apparent that French military secrets were somehow being revealed to Germany. In 1894, it was decided that Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was to blame. He was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to life in prison. It became evident, however, that his accusation was based on his Jewish background rather than credible evidence. In fact, documents had been forged by military officials in an attempt to frame Dreyfus. A major scandal broke out, amplified by newspaper coverage. Society was polarized by the 12-year-long Dreyfus Affair, and the issue extended into politics. So-called Dreyfusards, or supporters of Dreyfus, wanted to strengthen the Republic to ensure that human rights would be protected. Anti-Dreyfusards, on the other hand, were a suddenly unified group of conservatives, royalists, and anti-Semite factions that were concerned with the army's reputation and sought to use the affair to splinter the Republic and restore the monarchy. In the end, Dreyfus was declared innocent and returned to his military post. The pro-Republic Dreyfusards gained credibility and favor from the French people as bastions of truth and justice. From there, the Third Republic gained control over the military and instituted reform. The Republic was saved by an ugly scandal, establishing lasting democracy in France. But the Dreyfus Affair highlighted anti-Semitism, or prejudice against Jewish people, bubbling beneath the surface of France and Europe as a whole. Here you can see an example of anti-Semitic propaganda distributed in France, one depicting Dreyfus being hanged as a traitor and the other depicting a prominent member of France's Jewish community as a monstrous ape hoarding money. Anti-Semitism is, sadly, a grim tale we'll eventually revisit. Let's get to our second guiding question. How did the Dreyfus Affair result in the strengthening of France's Third Republic? While it was a struggle, it was during this time that Britain and France were shaped into the democracies they are today. Next up, we'll be crossing both the Atlantic and the Pacific to tell the tale of British colonies that were starting to get a bit restless for freedom. We won't mind the boat ride, of course, because as you know, history is everywhere. Hey!